Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for CHSN. We are brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. With Charlie Roumeliotis, I am Pat Boyle. How you doing, Charlie?
Snowy Friday morning here in Chicago.
Yeah, quite a bit of snow. And we've got couple games on the horizon. Blackhawks in Detroit tonight take on the feverish Red Wings and Patrick Kane, who's on a roll himself. And then they come back to Chicago on Saturday for a tilt against Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers, who are already in Chicago. And they will practice here in Chicago and be waiting for the Hawks.
Yeah, we got a hockey night in Canada in Chicago on Saturday night.
Well, the Hawks are coming off one of their, I'd say, surprising wins, but they played the teams that are higher up in the standings. They've played them better than they've played teams that are middling or are below the 500 mark in the standings. For whatever reason, they say they're more locked in. That kind of irritates me to think that you would take, like a St. Louis type of team off, but I digress. But nonetheless, it was a glimpse of the future in the 3-1 victory over Colorado. We saw both Bedard and Nazar score. We saw Colton Dach get his first NHL point. And it was really nice to see the way Connor Bedard played. I thought it was one of his best games, not only this season, but of his career.
Yeah, obviously the Blackhawks got great goaltending by Peter Mrazek, who made some terrific saves throughout the game to keep that tight for Chicago. But Hawks didn't take many penalties in that game. The young guys thrive. Like, this wasn't the veterans leading the way. This was the young guys who were like, against Nathan MacKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, Cale Makar, three guys that are in the top 10 in NHL scoring. And the Hawks did a very nice job of limiting their offensive output. It was one of the rare games that MacKinnon was held off the score sheet entirely. And I don't know if you remember the first Colorado game, MacKinnon was a -4. So they've done a pretty good job in two games against Colorado, limiting those top guns. But yeah, you mentioned Bedard and Nazar. That was it was fun to watch both of them produce in the same game, because that was kind of like, all right, it's a glimpse of what could be in the future. I mean, there are going to be many, many other forwards in the pipeline that hopefully trickle through Chicago and play big roles on the next really good Blackhawks team. But for them to finally show a glimpse. And oh, by the way, both of them were awesome at the faceoff circle too. So that was an encouraging part as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first time both of them were above 50%. I think, what was Bedard, 60-some-odd%?
Yeah, he was in the 60s.
Yeah, and so it was an all-around complete game. And to that, I loved some of the things I saw from Bedard. The Mikheyev goal, he dumps the puck in, he chases it down, he gets the turnover, and Mikheyev scores. Even on the disallowed goal for the kicking motion, I loved that, he was doing his Tyler Bertuzzi, going to the paint. That puck could have easily bounced in off of a shin pad or another part of his body before it got to his skates, and he could have got credited for a goal that way. So it was seeing some of the way that, he was playing away from the puck, going to areas that, he sometimes has not been going to. And it was, to me, it was a blueprint of how we can see him continue to be on this roll. He's now on this 8-game point streak.
For sure. And what's interesting too is when you're the home team, the visiting team submits their lineup first, and then the home team does. And Colorado put the Nathan MacKinnon line out there first, as expected. But I thought, Jason Dickinson, that's his, they countered with Connor Bedard's line. And so I thought, wow, okay, is Bedard's line going to go up against MacKinnon all night? Or is that just kind of like, we just want the Bedard line to set the tone? And so it ended up being a terrific game by Connor Bedard, like you mentioned. And how about that shot on his goal? Poor Trent Miner making his NHL first career NHL start. If you look at the replay on the shot by Connor Bedard, the puck is literally in the back of the net before Miner is even reacting to like where he wants to go. I mean, he was probably not expecting a shot that fast by a 19-year-old kid. But Bedard like legitimately has one of the best shots in the NHL. And so it was nice to see the production by Connor, goal and assist, nice percentage in the faceoff circle as well. But like you mentioned, some of the things he did away from the puck too, it has been encouraging because remember, if you think of last year, the Colorado game, I remember him talking. It was his first, was it like second or third game of the season or whatever? And he's like, I barely touched the puck. Like,
I don't. He might have touched it once. I don't even. It was crazy. And to that point, how about Frankie Nazar away from the puck or in the neutral zone with a good stick that created the opportunity for Colton Dock to shoot the puck, and then the rebound comes to Nazar. So it was overall well-rounded performances from both of the first-round picks of the Blackhawks, doing things the right way. And I think there's a lot of things that, you know, the coaching staff can pull from a game like that and say, that's how you play this game, and that's how you're going to get more touches and you're going to get more ink on the score sheet.
For sure. I think with Frank Nazar specifically, the production probably hasn't been where he wants it to be so far since being called up. He was named the AHL All-Star representative for Rockford a couple days ago after his terrific performance. But for him, finding the back of the net is great. But I've started to see glimpses of him where you're like, oh, wow, like there's that skating that the Blackhawks have really talked about. And there was that one play, I can't remember which game it was, either Montreal or New York, or where he was shot out of a cannon and, you know, created a scoring chance. He was so close to scoring on kind of like a Peter Forsberg type move where he pumps the brakes and tries to slide it far side on the goaltender. But those are the kinds of plays that Frank Nazar makes that you're like, okay, if he has that sort of confidence and that continues to grow, you're going to see that trickle into the production side of it if he continues to create the chances that he has been lately.
Peter Mrazek has not been himself since he returned from injury. He did look like himself on Wednesday night against Colorado. He was fantastic. There were several sequences, I think of in the second period, where there were 2 or 3 grade A scoring chances, including one on Rantanen's stick, and Mrazek shut the door down. So I know he was frustrated with, you know, how he was playing post-injury. And what we saw on Wednesday is what we saw the first, by and large, the first 25 to 30 games of the season.
Yeah, I think he was starting to get a little bit frustrated with himself, and you wonder how much of that trickled into his overall confidence, where he's like, man, I don't think I've ever been through a stretch like this in my time in Chicago, because he's been really good. And maybe if he has a bad game here or there, he's able to bounce back right away. At least in the past he was. But for him, I mean, prior to Wednesday's game, 0-6-0, 4.97 goals against average, and an .834 save percentage in his last 7 appearances. I mean, he didn't have a win since the November 27th game against Dallas. I mean, it was almost a month and a half ago. And so for him to get back in the win column, but not only get back in the win column, but the way he performed, hopefully that those struggles are behind him and he has kind of refound his form moving forward.
You know, both of us were at Fifth Third Arena for a practice before the Colorado game, and we were talking to Jason Dickinson. And, you know, he's a real insightful player as far as he gives really thoughtful answers and you know, really he's very cerebral. And you can see that maybe, you know, down the road he might get into coaching or what have you. But what did you take away from that conversation that you had with Jason, and you know, what did you take away from that?
Yeah, so that was the practice where it was coming off that really disappointing loss after the Montreal game, where you're like, oh man, like where did that come from?
The Ranger game, yeah.
Yeah, the Ranger game. And I was watching practice and they were doing a drill on the main ice. And all of a sudden I hear this loud noise along the bench. And I turned to see where that came from. And it was Jason Dickinson just shattering his stick over the bench because he wasn't thrilled with whatever had transpired in the drill where he was on the ice. And so then he steps on the ice, goes onto the other part of the bench, walks inside the locker room, and he's in there for like 30 seconds trying to go get another stick, comes back out, and he's, on the bench. He's frustrated. And then there was another drill. It was like a couple shifts later in the same drill where he had an opportunity. He was coming down the right side of the ice, and he was trying to like elbow his way in to create a scoring chance, and he got the puck stripped from him. And then he went back on the bench and he like threw his water bottle down. And then at the end of practice, they're doing these face-off drills, and you can see him having like a spirited venting session to Nick Foligno. And so I was like, I gotta go talk to him after just to see like if he's frustrated with himself, the team, like what's going on here. And credit to him, I kind of broke the ice by saying, how many sticks did we go through today at practice? And he's like, just broke one. And he was like, I'm trying to get better at managing his emotions, but at the same time, he was like, it's hard for me to come to the rink with a smile on my face when we're losing. And so I think he's carrying that. And a lot of players are probably carrying that to the rink. And it's hard when you're not winning hockey games to come to the rink in a good mood, right? And so I think for him personally, he's probably disappointed with where his play has been at. But as a team, you're seeing it trickle into some of these psyches of even the veterans. And so I thought it was fascinating where he's like trying to manage his emotions of being positive when he is at the rink, but not to a place where he's like complacent that, he's satisfied with where the team is at overall.
Yeah. And for those of us that are around the team on a regular basis, there are vibes. You can feel it. You can watch a practice and see a team that's frustrated. You can walk into a room and whether there's no music on or you can just, you can tell the team came off a bad loss, or right. You can tell the team has stacked 3 wins together. They're very different feelings when you're in those rooms. And, I approached your conversation with Jason and was talking about, can you have fun in a season where the wins are not where you want them to be? Because, at the end of the day, it gets really cumbersome to come to work day in and day out and just, feel like you're beaten down, talking about negative things and, being in last play, all the things that, find our identity. Why can't we do this against, all the, the rinse and repeat. And, Jason made a point of saying like, I said, can you have fun? Obviously winning translates to fun and smiles, but can you have smiles when things aren't going great? And his answer kind of was like, if we're up there on the ice joking and laughing around, we're also going to send a message like, we don't care. Right. So I was like, yeah, that's a good point. Like, it could be taken instead of, somebody saying, wow, like they're trying to lighten the mood in a season full of, more disappointment than success. They're out there having, a fun moment. Somebody could look at that same exact scenario and go, oh, these guys don't care, So I was like, okay, touche. I get what you're saying on that. And to that point, when we talk about identity, because that seems to be a buzzword that this team has been discussing throughout this season and throughout the rebuild. What do you think the identity is of this team? Do you think they know what the identity is yet, 41 games in?
Yeah, Troy Murray and I had a great discussion about this on Wednesday after the post-game show that I think everyone's identity, you want to be hardworking team, not like be hard to play against. But, we were acknowledging on the postgame show, like that should be the baseline, like that shouldn't be, something to like kind of hang your hat on. Maybe it's different for this Blackhawks team because they understand they're in the middle of a rebuild. But I think we saw it was Luke Richardson's first year where you're like, all right, that team works very hard, even though their roster is not a competitive roster. And so I think that's the kind of effort they're trying to see out of this Blackhawks team on a more consistent basis. Anders Sorensen was asked about this too, and he got a little bit more specific in saying we want to be a hard forechecking team. Like that's kind of the identity that he wants his Blackhawks teams to play. But then in the same breath, he kind of acknowledged he's trying to marry that with the personnel that they have. So like they're sometimes you just don't have the players to play the kind of style that you want to play. And so you're trying to find this balance between not fitting a square hole into a round peg or or vice versa, whatever it is. And so it's been challenging, I'm sure, for the Blackhawks. I think for me, I always lean back on the identity that Kyle Davidson wants his teams to play. And he's like fast, so it's like, if you play fast, then you're going to be harder to play with on the forecheck because you're getting the pucks quicker. You're transitioning quicker. You're getting pucks from the defense to the neutral zone or up to the forwards quicker. So if you have that sort of identity where we want to be a quick team, I think that's the overall identity or what the Blackhawks want their identity to be. The problem is that they have a lot of veterans on the team that don't play that fast. And so you're kind of waiting for these young guys to infuse the roster so that you can play the way that you want to play long-term.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there. The identity, they want to be fast. They want to get in on the forecheck. They want to create. But because of the makeup of the roster, and again, most of these veterans are here on 1 and 2 year deals and aren't going to be a part of the equation when this team enters its playoff / championship window. So you need them to build the culture to teach the young players how to play the game the right way. But where they're at in their career, they can't play maybe to the identity that the team ultimately is going to play at. So it is a tough juggling act, so to speak. And that's really, that's life of a rebuild, right? That's why you see these, I think so many people think back to the 2010, 13, 15 team and how that team was assembled. And they look at it like Kane and Taves were drafted, championships came a couple years after. They were the final pieces to the championship foundation. They were the last pieces to it. They already had the Patrick Sharps, the Duncan Keiths, the Brent Seabrooks. They also had the role players, the Bolins, the Bickles, all those guys in the system. Johnny and Patrick came late in the equation, and then they add Hossa. In this sense, Bedard is the first piece to your hopefully championship foundation, and now you're trying to find more pieces to join him, and that is going to take some time, obviously.
For sure, and that's the challenging part about the patience that's required to do a rebuild of this magnitude. Because, I think back to like the previous couple years prior to the rebuild when Kyle Davidson declared, hey, we got to tear this thing down. Like the Hawks tried the patchwork route. Like they tried acquiring Seth Jones and Marc-Andre Fleury and Tyler Johnson and reacquiring Andrew Shaw. Like they were like, okay, we've had a couple down years, but like let's kind of retool here on the fly. And they tried that, and it was a disaster. And so we got to compartmentalize. Like the rebuild was most definitely the route to go. Having said that, you declare rebuild year one, and then year one of the rebuild, you land the guy Connor Bedard, and I think in some minds it's like, okay, how do we fast track this now? But I mean, like the other guy that was drafted in the first round with Connor Bedard is Oliver Moore, and he's still in his sophomore year at college, so he's not even here yet. So it's like you have to put all of it into perspective, and so patience is definitely required. And unlike the the three cups era for Chicago, like Marian Hossa was able to come here on a 12-year contract. It's just to get the AAV down. So it's just that stuff doesn't happen anymore. And so you have to, you really, really have to build your rebuilds through the draft, because it's hard to land those marquee free agents at a reasonable price. Like if you want a guy like Mitch Marner, if he hits the market, you're going to have to pay a lot of money for him. It's gone are the days where you can get a guy like Hossa for $5.5 million cap hit.
All right, so here we are. It's 41 games down, 41 to go. We decided we'd hand out some midseason grades. Are you ready to assign your grades, Professor Roumeliotis?
Yes, I have my red marker ready.
All right, let's start with the forwards. What grade do you give the forwards?
All right, so I wrestled with this one. I have them down as a C-, and I wrestled with just giving them a C, but there was so much inconsistency at the start of the season that if you look at the raw numbers, like Tyler Bertuzzi's on track for 28 goals, and Connor Bedard 74 points, and Tara Vinen has been overall his numbers look great. But you look at some of the ups and downs, like Bertuzzi was like almost invisible the first month or so of the season. Bedard had that 12-game goal drought in there. Tara Vinen had 7 points in his first 5 games, then had only 6 points in his next 25 games. And so if you look at some of the raw numbers, you're like, okay, not bad. But there have just been some really inconsistent stretches. They have been turning a corner slowly in that department. But really the only guy I feel that has exceeded expectations has been Ryan Donato, who is, 11 goals. He's on pace for 23. At one point, he was on pace for like 40 after that really hot stretch. And so C- would be my grade, but they're starting to trend in the right direction.
All right. We are in lockstep. I have a C- for the forward. And much of the same that you talked about. Early on, Ryan Donato was the surprise point producer of the forward group in a bottom 6 role. And Bertuzzi, as you mentioned, not on the score sheet at all, basically, the first 20 games or so, but he has been absolutely lighting it up the last 15. Give them credit for adapting to a new system, a 2-1-2 system that Sorensen has implemented. And while it has produced some more scoring opportunities, it's really ignited Connor Bedard. And I think if you look at Bedard, just his point production, but how he carries himself, he seems much more at ease the last couple of weeks, just as he makes his way around the room compared to when he was mired in that 12-game goalless drought and answering the same question day after day. So I give the forwards a C-. And again, they've been thrown, a lot has been thrown at them. Let's switch now to the defensemen. I'll start there. I gave the defensemen a C. I thought Alex Vlasic has been the one player that has stood out the most to me, picked up the slack during Seth Jones' injury. It has been a struggle for Seth since returning from the broken foot. Maybe he came back a little sooner rather than ease back into the lineup. And I don't think he was given any favors by the coaching staff by dropping him into the minutes that he normally eats up. But I did think his game against Colorado was his best since coming back from injury. So hopefully he can build upon that. I think we've seen some of the young guys take steps in their development, like Crevier and Nolan Allen. But overall, I look at C as an average score, and the D have been, in my book, average.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, but I have a C plus for them, mainly because just trying to contextualize like the 3 of the 6 defensemen that are on the roster right now, Nolan Allen, Louis Crevier, and Wyatt Kaiser, going into this season, they combined for 65 games total in the NHL. Nolan Allen had never played an NHL game. Crevier had 24 games going into this year, and Kaiser 41. And just for context, they say you know what a defenseman is in the NHL after about 300 games. And so it's like, the combined, they only had 65 coming into this year. And so the injuries, Seth Jones, Alec Martinez, and now Connor Murphy, that's hurt because all 3 of those guys were going to be leaned on to play fairly significant roles to help shelter some of the minutes for some of those young guys that are starting to break into the NHL. Like, I don't think we expected Nolan Allen to be a full-time NHL player this year. And so not having Martinez and Brody's been a disappointment as well. So I think you don't have those veterans to really lean on. I have a C plus just given the expectations that I've had for this group.
Would you be surprised if Brody is not back next year? I know he's under contract, but do you think he's trending in a way that he may not be a part of this team next year?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think if ideally next year he would be the 7th defenseman at best. And so I don't know if it's like a dire situation where you got to find a way to unload the contract, but we'll see. And by the way, I forgot to mention, first 25 games of the season, Hawks had 4 goals from their defensemen. In the last 16, they've had 9. So they have been trending in a more positive direction offensively. But yeah, it's been tough with Seth and Connor and Martinez down with injuries. And then, we were talking about the disappointment of TJ Brody. It's really hard to lean on some of those young guys on a more on a heavier minute type load when you don't have those veterans to surround them or pick up the slack.
All right, this one's going to be interesting because it's kind of a tale of 2 halves of the first half of the season. Goalies, what is your overall grade for the goalies?
Yeah, so first 2 months of the season was an A for me, and then the last month or so, last month and a half has been a D. So in the middle, I met B minus is where I settled down because is that where you lockstep too?
Very close. First 25 to 30 games, I gave them an A. The last 10 to 15 or 12 games, I gave them a D. So I averaged that to a C plus.
Okay. I aired more on the optimistic side, I guess. But it's fair because, I was looking at the save percentage through December 5th, which was under Luke Richardson. The Hawks were 12th in overall team save percentage at .897. Since Sorensen became the head coach, the Hawks are 29th in save percentage at .876. And so if you marry those numbers together, it's .889 save percentage at 23rd ranked in the NHL. But I feel like some of those games in the first 2 months of the season, I mean, Arvid Soderblom was playing terrific, and Peter Mrazek was excellent too. And so I think my expectations of Soderblom coming into this year were lower given how last year had went. And so when they had a tandem of Mrazek and Soderblom where both were playing excellent, like there was not a game where the Blackhawks went into the first 35 games of the season or whatever it was that I felt the Blackhawks did not have a chance to win the hockey game because both goalies were on their game. It's tailed off lately, and so that's why I give the Blackhawks a B minus in goaltending so far.
All right, special teams. We'll go combined grade here. I'm going to give special teams overall an A minus. I'm giving the PK an A. They have been fantastic most of the season. Had a little minor hiccup around the Winter Classic, and the power play. I give them a B minus, so or around a B.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm going with an A minus overall for special teams.
Yep. We're on the same wavelength, Pat. A- for me too. I think if you look at the overall numbers, power play Hawks are 12th at 23.1%. Penalty kill 4th in the NHL at 83.9%. There was that stretch earlier in the season where the Hawks went 5 straight games only having one power play, and then one of those power plays was like 17 seconds because it got negated, and so they did hit a little bit of a lull where you're like, oh man, this is not the power play that we thought it was earlier in the season. Like there were a few games early in the year where the Hawks had multi goals on the power play. The Edmonton game I think of early to start the season, they had 3 of them. So you're like, all right, power play is off to a great start. But the penalty kill, I mean, they had that stretch where how many did they kill in a row? I can't remember what that final total was, but wasn't it like 30 plus?
Yeah, I think it was like 31.
Yeah, and it was in the middle of that was a coaching change, and they didn't skip a beat. So credit to Kevin Dean for the being responsible and overseeing that penalty kill. I think typically teams will aim for 100% as far as power play and penalty kill percentage combined, and the Hawks are at 107. And so that's an awesome number for Chicago. And so no complaints in that department.
All right, coaching. Obviously, a coaching change was made, 26 games in. Luke played a different a style of game as far as we had that crazy stat that the Hawks were either in the lead in the third period by a goal, tied, or down by a goal in all but one game under Luke. So they were in all those games, but they weren't ending up on the winning side and losing most of them 3-1, empty net goal at the end. You've had the change under Sorensen. They are now, I think, 6-9 in his games. So it's a smaller sample size, a slight uptick in win percentage. But when they have lost, they've been blown out of several games over the last half dozen. So take it all into consideration. I give the coaching a C. It's a tough, it's hard to implement new systems in season, and also doing it with not a lot of practice time, and trying to figure out, do you have the personnel to run the system you want? So you factor it all in. I think Luke did a good job as far as keeping his team in games, which I think is something he wanted to improve upon from last year, but didn't see enough offense. We've seen more offense under Anders, but we've seen, some slightly lopsided scoreboard. So overall, I give it that C grade, as it's kind of been a state of flux under two head coaches.
Yeah, and that's a fair grade. I kind of not eliminated the Luke Richardson part, but I was kind of like, okay, what grade would I give Anders Sorensen since he took over and the coaching staff? And I leaned into a B. I think before you probably could have. I think the C would have been fair, just just in some different areas, like even the Taylor Hall scratch situation, just the lack of communication, whatever. I didn't really want to bury that or open up that old wound, but just moving forward with Sorensen, I would give Sorensen a B. And reasoning is, I feel like he's unlocked Bertuzzi. Teuvo Teravainen has been playing much better. Ilya Mikheyev has been playing a lot better as of late. You have Connor Bedard on an 8-game point streak. You're getting more contributions from the defensemen. Like I had mentioned earlier, only had 4 goals in their first 25 games from blue liners. Since then, 9 goals in 16 games. So he's unlocking that part. But then on the flip side, you mentioned like some of these losses are, it was 4 of the last 5 losses prior to the game on Wednesday. It was 4+ goal margins. So you're like, oh, what's going on here? But then, you correlate the goaltending. You're like, well, they got their 29th of goaltending under Sorensen. So it's like one of those old adages, like, show me a good coach, I'll show you a good goaltender. And so if you in some of those games too, like Soderblom and Mrazek earlier in the season, like they were making some big time saves. They were playing well above average, not just average. And so the goaltending has over-indexed the other way under Sorensen. And unfortunately, it makes it seem like the Hawks have been playing terrible hockey of late, or like in those losses. But some of those were like, it's not on the goaltender, but that's a save that Mrazek or Soderblom had made earlier in the season.
By the way, the Hawks ended their national TV losing skid the other night they had gone 15 straight games without a loss, without a victory on national TV. They had gone 0-7 to start this year, and they finally get in the win column against Colorado. They're back on good old CHSN on Friday. What do we got, a 6 o'clock puck drop or 6:30 in Motown?
It's a 6 o'clock puck drop against Detroit. Yeah.
Okay. So 5:33 game. And then we've got, what time is Saturday's game against Connor McDavid and the Oilers?
Saturday is 6 o'clock, but I'm told that it's going to be a 6:15 puck drop because of Hockey Night in Canada.
Absolutely. Yep. We know that. Okay. So looking forward to it. It should be two real. I enjoy watching both teams play. I'll always love watching Patrick Kane. And both, since Todd McClellan has taken over, you talk about unlocking a player. DeBrincat and Kane have been on a roll here the last 5 or 6 games. They have.
It's been a real nice coaching change for Todd McClellan's group. I will say their power play has been unreal. So I think they're 10 of 19 in the 6 games since McClellan. That's above 50%. So that's not sustainable over the long term, but they're starting to find their groove. So it should be a fun matchup against Patty Kane, and then you got McDavid and Draisaitl on Saturday.
I think that's one of McClellan's calling cards is his power plays. I remember Adam Bursch telling me how detailed they are about different entries and how they change them up and keep the PK guessing. So that's something to keep an eye on here as we watch Friday night's game.
Also, really quick, I was watching McClellan's press conference yesterday, I think after one of the win, or I think it was a morning skate or practice, and he said something interesting about, they were talking about line combinations, and he's like, my philosophy is I like to keep combos together and rotate the third person. So like if you try to find a DeBrincat and Kane, you keep those together, but then you try to find that third guy. He's like, because I find that if you try to rearrange too much, the chemistry gets all out of whack. And so I thought that was interesting. I think that could be a good learning lesson too for, like, we think of the Bedard Bertuzzi combo right now. It's like, just you can rotate that third person.
Yeah. And I think that's what Anders is doing. He started out with Hall there, gave that some run, and he's tried others. Lately, it's been Mikheyev, and we saw how that produced the other night against Colorado. So interesting thought process there by McClellan, and I think it's something that other coaches try to mimic as well. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast on CHSN. For Charlie Roumeliotis, I'm Pat Boyle. Thank you for watching and listening, and we will catch you next time.